Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Friedrich Engels. Chapter 2, Dialectics. In the meantime, along with and after the French philosophy of the 18th century had arisen the new German philosophy culminating in Hegel. Its greatest merit was the taking up again of dialectics as the highest form of reasoning. The old Greek philosophers were all born natural dialecticians, and Aristotle, the most encyclopedic of them, had already analyzed the most essential forms of dialectic thought. The newer philosophy, on the other hand, although in it also dialectics had brilliant exponents, exactly Gratia, Descartes, and Spinoza, had especially through English influence become more and more rigidly fixed in so-called metaphysical mode of reasoning, by which also the French of the 18th century were almost wholly dominated, at all events in their special philosophical work. Outside philosophy in the restricted sense, the French nevertheless produced masterpieces of dialectic. We need only to call to mind Diderot's La Neveu de l'amour and Rousseau's Discours sur l'honneur et les fondements de l'humanité parmi les hommes. We give here in brief the essential character of these two modes of thought. When we consider and reflect upon nature at large, or the history of mankind, or our own intellectual activity, at first we see the picture of an endless entanglement of relations and reactions, permutations and combinations, in which nothing remains what, where, and as it was, but everything moves, changes, comes into being, and passes away. We see, therefore, at first the picture as a whole, with its individual parts still more or less kept in the background. We observe the movements, transitions, connections, rather than the things that move, combine, and are connected. This primitive, naive, but intrinsically correct conception of the world is that of ancient Greek philosophy, and was first clearly formulated by Heraclitus. Everything is and is not. Everything is fluid, is constantly changing, constantly coming into being, and passing away. But this conception, correctly as it expresses the general character of the picture of appearances as a whole, does not suffice to explain the detail of which this picture is made up. And so long as we do not understand these, we have not a clear idea of the whole picture. In order to understand these details, we must detach them from the natural, special causes, effects, etc. This is, primarily, the task of natural science and historical research, branches of science which the Greek of classical times, on very good grounds, relegated to a subordinate position, because they had first of all to collect materials for these sciences to work upon. A certain amount of natural and historical material must be collected before there can be any critical analysis, comparison, and arrangement in classes, orders, and species. The foundations of the exact natural sciences were, therefore, first worked out by the Greeks of the Alexandrian period, and later on, in the Middle Ages, by the Arabs. Real natural science dates from the second half of the 15th century, and thence onward it had advanced with constantly increasing rapidity. The analysis of nature into its individual parts, the grouping of the different natural processes, objects in definite classes, the study of the internal anatomy of organized bodies and their manifold forms, these were the fundamental conditions of the gigantic strides in our knowledge of nature that have been made during the last 400 years. But this method of work has also left us as a legacy the habit of observing natural objects and processing in isolation, apart from their connection with the vast whole, of observing them in repose, not in motion, as constraints, not as essentially variables, in their death, not in their life. And when this way of looking at things was transferred by Bacon and Locke from natural science to philosophy, it begot a narrow metaphysical mode of thought peculiar to the last century. To the metaphysician, things and their mental reflexes, ideas, are isolated, are to be considered one after the other, and apart from each other, are objects of investigation, fixed, rigid, given once for all. He thinks in absolutely irreconcilable antitheses. His communication is yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. For him, a thing either exists or does not exist. A thing cannot at the same time be itself and something else. Positive and negative absolutely exclude one another. Cause and effect stand in rigid antithesis, one to the other. At first sight, this mode of thinking seems to us very luminous, because it is a so-called sound common sense. Only sound common sense, respectable fellow that he is, in the homely realm of his own four walls, has very wonderful adventures. Directly he ventures out into the wild world of research, in the metaphysical mode of thought, justifiable and necessary as it is in a number of domains whose extent varies according to the nature of the peculiar object of investigation, sooner or later reaches a limit beyond which it becomes one-sided, restricted, abstract, lost in insoluble contradictions. In the contemplation of individual things, it forgets the connection between them. In the contemplation of their existence, it forgets the beginning and the end of that existence. Under repose, it forgets their motion. It cannot see the woods for the trees. For everyday purposes, we know and can say, exempli gratia, whether an animal is alive or not. But upon closer inquiry, we find that his is, in many cases, a very complex question, as the jurists know very well. They have cudgelled their brains in vain to discover a rational limit beyond which the killing of the child in its mother's womb is murder. It is just as impossible to determine absolutely the moment of death, for physiology proves that death is not an instantaneous, momentary phenomenon, but a very protracted process. In like manner, every organized being is every moment the same and not the same. Every moment it assimilates matter supplied from without, and gets rid of other matter. Every moment some cells of its body die, and others build themselves anew. In a longer or shorter time, matter of its body is completely renewed. It is replaced by other molecules of matter, so that every organized being is always itself, and yet something other than itself. Further, we find upon closer investigation that the two poles of an antithesis, positive and negative, example gratia, are as inseparable as they are imposed, and that despite all their opposition, they are mutually interpenetrated. And we find, in like manner, that cause and effect are conceptions which only hold good in their application to individual cases. But as soon as we consider the individual cases and their general connection in the universe as a whole, they run into each other, and they become confounded when we contemplate that universal action and reaction in which causes and effects are eternally changing places, so that what is effect here and now will be cause there, and then and vice versa. None of these processes or modes of thought enter into the framework of metaphysical reasoning. Dialectics, on the other hand, comprehends things in their representations, ideas, in their essential connection, concatenation, motion, origin, and ending. Such processes as those mentioned above are, therefore, so many corroborations of its own method of procedure. Nature is the proof of dialectics. It must be said for modern science that it has furnished this proof with very rich materials increasingly daily, and thus has shown that, in the last resort, nature works dialectically and not metaphysically, that she does not move in the eternal oneness of a perpetually recurring circle, but goes through a real historical evolution. In this connection, Darwin must be named before all others. He dealt the metaphysical conception of nature the heaviest blow by his proof that all organic beings, plants, animals, and man itself are the products of a process of evolution going through millions of years. And the naturalists who have learned to think dialectically are far and few between. This conflict of the results of the discovery of preconceived modes of thinking explains the endless confusion now reigning in theoretical natural science, the despair of teachers as well as learners, of authors and readers alike. The exact representation of the universe, of its evolution, and the development of mankind, and of the reflection of this evolution in the minds of men, can therefore only be attained by the methods of dialectics, with its constant regard to the innumerable actions and reactions of life and death, of progressive or retrogressive changes. And in this spirit, the new German philosophy has worked. Kant began his career by resolving the stable solar system of Newton and its eternal duration, after the famous initial impulse had once been given into the result of a historical process, the formation of the sun and all the planets out of a rotating nebulous mass. From this, he at the same time drew the conclusion that, given this origin of the solar system, its future death followed of necessity. This theory, half a century later, was established mathematically by Laplace. And half a century after that, the spectroscope proved the existence in space of such incandescent masses of gas in various stages of condensation.